That's typically how it goes. Monica, you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. All right, everyone. This week we are talking about consumer insights. Our guest is Monica Staco. She's been working in consumer insights for over 15 years, helping organizations with their data strategy to improve profitability and overall business performance. So, Monica, thank you so much for taking time out your schedule to be with us today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
All right. Typically we ask our guests about their background. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I like to tell people I got into marketing research from the back door. And what I mean by that is I went to school for psychology. I have a master's in psychology, but I was part of my professor's research team. And I enjoyed research. So when I graduated from grad school, the first job that I landed was in an advertising agency doing marketing research. And I fell in love with it. I love the dynamic piece of it. It was very similar to doing research. For me, it was similar to doing research in the psychology field, but then with applicable results. I could see how businesses would really consume the information and make actionable steps right away. So that's how I started, and I really fell in love with the industry.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and I think this is a very, very timely topic. Because more and more companies are trying to become more customer centric.
Right.
Monica, can you walk us through the evolution of consumer insights? It's 2019. We know it as customer centricity, right? But was it that way 20, 50 years ago? Walk us through the evolution of consumer insights.
Sure. So the whole field was born out of essentially people wanting to understand, how do people consume more products? How to get them to buy more? And at that time, a lot of it was around advertising. So being able to put information on TV ads or radios. So the advertising world were really the ones that would consume a lot of research and understanding what it means. Not that other fields didn't, but this is where you could see quickly how they used it. And over time, a lot more organization understood, well, this is not just about advertising. We also want to know what consumers think. And I have to say, advancements of technology too, now there's this whole accessibility of information and data about consumers and what they do when they do it, which is frightening. And around that time was, and I have to say maybe 10 years ago, that's when the idea of big data was created and that field was created. So, which is different than marketing research. And the difference I see, so big data is understanding how to get all the information, aggregating all pieces of numbers in an organization and what to do with that. And marketing research is more like the middleman. I see marketing research as a middleman, understanding business needs and understanding data. So taking the information and being able to translate it in what the business needs and feeding them more insights. And I know more, I can transition more to also the difference between data and insights. As I talked about both right now. So again, the idea is that there's a lot of information, a lot of numbers, a lot of pieces of data, so to speak. And 10, 15 years ago, it was great to know this information. But right now, you have a piece of information and then what? What does this mean? It's no longer impressive. It's, what do you make of it? What do you make of this information? What is it telling you about your consumer? And as an organization, how are you going to respond to that? Do you need to respond to that? Is it something you're interested in? And this is where my role is important, because I am the person that's going to create the storytelling, that's going to interpret what that information means beyond just the data point. And that's when the insights comes in. And it's important that the person understands the business as well as consumers and the numbers to be able to be that middleman.
Yeah, no, that's awesome explanation. So, how do you know when to conduct a research project? Are there certain triggers within an organization that happen, and it's like, oh, okay, I need to do a research project. How does that happen?
Sure. So, what I've seen in my experience, and a lot of companies who are not familiar with research, they start getting curious about it when they realize that their numbers are down. It goes to bottom line.
Profitability or cost? Yep. Okay.
Exactly. So that's when they start thinking, okay, something is going wrong. We were doing the same thing we did maybe 3 years, and all of a sudden we're not making money. What's going on? So that's
Hmm.
one of the triggers I've seen quite often. And a lot of time it's to understand, is it because our product or service is no longer resonating, or what's really going on? So there's more of a questioning and reflection happening within the organization. Now, when other organizations that are familiar with research, and I would talk about big
Hmm.
retailers that I've worked with, they use research inside out on a daily basis for any decisions they're making. They're not gonna make any decision without looking at their information. So those are organizations that's a little bit more advanced, and they get the understanding of what it means to have data, and what does it mean also for the business. So they're more used to consuming the information.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So now let's say that trigger has happened. A company is not hitting their numbers, and now you're in a position where you have to launch a research process or a research project. How can you walk us through that framework?
Sure. So before anything starts, and I consider it as part of my framework, I try to understand what's the problem we're trying to resolve.
There you
And
go. Yep.
whomever is bringing this problem to the table, I
Hmm.
sit down with that person and I have a discovery session with them. So what do you want to know exactly? Do you already have this information somewhere else in your organization? It could be on a different team. Now, if the information is no, okay, we're not going to jump to research yet, but now let's start thinking about hypothesis. What if you realize that your consumers are no longer interested in, I don't know, cable TV? Then what? What
Hmm.
does this mean? Let's start thinking about what are you going to do with the research. I also,
Hmm.
because it's important for me to know, we're not just going to spend a lot of money and time just to have data, but I start really working with whomever wants to initiate the project to understand, what are you going to do with that? So I start having different what if scenarios, and different hypotheses, and have them start
Yeah.
thinking through it. Yeah. So
Yeah. So the
that's
first
the
so the,
starting
mhm.
point.
Yeah, I was going to say, so the first phase is really identifying that outcome that you want to achieve, and identifying those hypotheses.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
And then the second level is doing secondary research, essentially. So really taking the time to understand, what do we already know as an organization. And it could be, again, from a different department, and it could be from employees who
Hmm.
are interacting with the consumers, or it could be from researching other companies. So this information may already be out there, so let's not just jump in and start a research project, but let's see what's already out there. So
Hmm.
that's what I consider like the second set to determine what project to do. And
Awesome.
out of that, this is where I will start recommending methodology, and this is where I would start recommending the ideal respondent participants, and meeting also with all the different department heads. That's something I pride myself of really doing well, is partnering with everyone in the organization, because
Yeah.
I like to say, it's not research. The research project is not just for the research department. Everyone is part of it.
Do you believe, now that you're sharing this information, my mind is going in different directions. Should this be somewhat of a core competency across the organization? as far as knowing how to conduct a research project to understand more about your customer. Because if you're sitting in different departments, whether it be, finance, HR, supply chain, it doesn't really matter. You're touching the customer from a different angle.
Exactly.
So should this be somewhat of a core competency? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm biased, so I would say absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. No, it just sounds like it should be a core competency.
Yes, yeah, it definitely, especially the world we live in right now. Like, so if you had asked me maybe 10 years ago where there wasn't a lot of competition, I would have said, well, some companies can get by. Nowadays, no. Yesterday, I was reading an article that one of my colleagues was quoted in the article, but it was about personalization. And there's this whole idea where consumers want to know that they are known, that they're gotten, that you understand them really. And they don't necessarily want to sit down and tell you all this information because they're smart now. So I don't want you to call me, Brian, and then for me to sit down and tell you, well, this is what I eat, this is the brand that I like, and this is what I do at 5 o'clock. No, it's for you to let me know that you understand me by offering products or services that really align with my lifestyle, align with my values. So the words purpose and values are coming up a lot. The words personalization is coming up a lot in the field of marketing, consumer insights.
That's very, very, very interesting. What are some common mistakes that companies are making? So maybe they've completed the research project, right? And now they're struggling to actually implement it all the way through. What are some common mistakes?
So the mistake I see happen quite often is not doing the pre-work, what I call the pre-work.
The pre-work, okay.
Which is essentially understanding what are we looking for, because you may be surprised by the results and it may take you somewhere completely different. And you may be frustrated because that's not what you wanted. But then when you don't do the pre-work, the hypothesis and laying out the different scenarios and possibilities, you can be very surprised by the results. So that's one mistake I see quite often. And another one is also misinterpreting the data. Because I talk about aligning with all the different department heads, which I think is very important. Everyone has an opinion and a voice at the table, especially when it comes to the consumer. So one specialty can look at the result and interpret one way, as opposed to someone sitting from a different perspective. So a lot of times I see that people who don't want to have different opinions, they just run with the data saying that's what it means, and they make mistakes by having not the appropriate implementation and follow through, and they miss the mark in the boat.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was thinking about how do you manage this in a mid-sized organization or a large organization? I would imagine that they have the most challenges, especially if consumer insights is a known commodity within the organization. So, for example, you mentioned being clear on outcomes and having the right hypotheses.
Right.
How do you manage that in a large organization? Because marketing is doing it and other departments are doing it. Like, how do you manage that?
Exactly. It goes back to, I mean, I hate saying this, but it really goes back to the culture. And when we talk about core competencies, it goes back to, is it a core competency? And if it is, guess what? It's not just going to be a marketing project. It's going to be communication is going to be involved. HR is going to be involved, because in a lot of the project I've worked on, the results were used to also educate the employees. So there is an HR component and training that comes in. So the sales department has to also be part of it. So to eliminate that, it's important that there's an agreement that we understand it's important. We want to know that. And this is to what end we want to know that. And let's put our heads together and collaborate to make it happen.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, Monica. Thank you for the advice. So we have a question. I'll read her question. Her question is related to applying this to the federal government arena. So she is a change manager working in a regulatory agency. She's witnessing that they are slow to incorporate any needed changes to address the customer needs. They have research and data, but taking the data to impact how they do their business is a struggle. The leadership is really stuck in conducting business the old way and are slow to change. And the consumer insights are becoming really critical right now. What do you suggest? What would you recommend to Marcy given this scenario?
Sure. This is a really great question, and this is not unusual. And that goes back to when you get the results and you start seeing a lot of information, and you as a leader, you're overwhelmed. Like, what do I do with that? So essentially, if the information is clear, and if there's clear evidence that it's the voice of the consumer, that's what they need. I would say continue to have conversations, whomever is holding this project. And this is where I say it's not just one person project. So let's say I was holding the project, I would make sure to continue to be in conversations with these leaders and understand what's going on. Where are they stuck? What else can I bring in? And usually when I bring in data to show, see, this is where we're getting, especially regulatory, I bring other data points to say, if we don't do this, this is where we're going to be in trouble. And this is how much money we're going to lose if we don't do this. Yes, I can understand that we may not be clear on next step. Let's start thinking about next step. Let's start asking different people in the organization, what do they think? Because a lot of the time, our consumers may have the answers themselves too for the organization. So a lot of the time when people see the numbers, there's some fear around it because people interpret it can be a scorecard. It can mean that you're not doing your job. So as a leader myself too, I can understand sometimes being stuck and hesitating if I have results and I'm not sure what to do, that my peers will say, I'm not doing a great job seeing what consumers are saying. So it's being able to look beyond that and continuing the dialogue to see where they stuck and continuing to use research to make the point and prove the point.
Yeah. What are some innovative ways that you've noticed that are happening in the market today? Like, are there anything that sticks out to you in how companies are reaching out to their customer base to get data beyond just surveys? Is there anything else that's hitting your eye right now?
So I'm fascinated by really people looking at the digital footprint of consumers and making recommendation based on that. Because a lot of the information is already out there. So companies spend a lot, and that's why more companies now have someone dedicated to research who will actually sit down and analyze all these pieces of information and putting it all together. So I see a lot of companies really relying on these different social media and reading it. There's a lot of tools now that read the tone of posts, different posts, because so I've been talking a lot about quantitative. This is where I'll make a shift. So now social media has also quantitative, but a qualitative piece of
qualitative aspect.
Right. So there's a lot of technology out there now that helps company understand the tone, understand the keywords, the buzzwords people are using, the hashtag, all the hashtag.
All the hashtags. Yeah.
It helps research because you can let's do hashtag research and see how many people are talking about it. What's the tone? What are they saying about it? What are the key words? So that's one way I'm seeing companies doing it where actually you don't have to spend extra money to implement that. This is something you can organically incorporate in the organizations. And there are also a lot of other tools like artificial intelligence, AI. I'm not close to even understanding. This is a big deal. This is a big deal.
Yeah, it's an emerging field.
Exactly. So a lot of companies are starting to think, what do we do with that? Where are we going with this? And it's important for all these organizations to start thinking, where are they on the spectrum of, do we want to go that route and use AI to determine who you're serving, or do we still want to have that personal touch and continue to have one-on-one engagement with consumers? And in some industries that makes sense. And I worked a lot with high network field, and it makes sense to continue to have these 15 minutes conversation, 20 minutes, and get to know the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, suppose you are a change management practitioner, or maybe you work in a PMO, or maybe you're a product manager, IT, but you're by yourself, and you know that your organization should really get closer to their end customer. What recommendations would you have? What should be their next steps?
This is where again I see myself as an educator in my role.
Absolutely.
And I say, start having these conversations. Start seeing who aligns with your thinking. Who is the executive who can sponsor you and continue to buy into what you're saying. And I really do believe it is not a solo, it's not a solo role or responsibility when it comes to research, because essentially if I'm the project manager, I end up with a lot of information, gold mines that a lot of people can use in the organization. So that's why I say I'm really of the approach of building relationship, building allyship within an organization to have partners that will advocate for what you want to see happen.
Yeah. So Monica, what's one thing that you want the audience to take away from this conversation?
So if there's one thing I'd love for the audience to take away, is that not to be scared of data, not to be scared of insights, essentially, and using it to make their life better.
Yeah.
Having conversations around it.
Absolutely. Well, Monica, that's all the questions I have, and that's all the questions that we received from the community. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the advice and guidance. And for those of you on the call, thank you for taking time out of your day to be a part of this conversation as well. This concludes the webcast. Everyone have a great rest of the day and have a great week.